Well, hello everybody, and welcome to episode number 21 of Cardboard Time. This is Arwen, and today I have a very special guest with me, Jamie Kraus. She is a very good friend. Jamie, do you want to introduce yourself?
I am just so flattered that you call me a special friend.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Jamie Kraus, like Arwen said. I am a mini painter by trade and now actually a business owner, technically speaking. So I'm sure we'll get into that quite a bit more later. That's kind of the long and short of who I am and what I do.
Oh, perfect. Well, we were able to get together this past week at the Malted Meeple last Friday, and unfortunately we kind of overstayed our welcome a little bit. A while ago, I had passed on the sad news on the show that the Malted Meeple had closed, but the happy news is that they've actually reopened, and they are just as good as ever. We had a ton of fun, so much so that basically 11:30 rolled around, and they came over to the table very nicely, very politely. They were really super nice about the situation and said, hey, how long is this game of yours going to take? Because we're closed. And it's like, oh, whoops. So we basically finished up, and that was it. But, big props to them.
Yeah, we managed to shut the place down in probably the world's first board game bar closeout combination. Probably the tamest way to close the bar down. But nonetheless, we still had a blast.
Yeah, I haven't closed anything down in a number of years, and now it was like, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here kind of thing.
And that is so much more my speed. I am like way too old to close down a bar anymore.
Oh, I know. 11 o'clock is doable for me. Like, the bars I used to go to back in Buffalo closed at 4 a.m., 5 a.m.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, almost kind of problematic, but I can't do that anymore. I can do 11.
11's good.
Yeah.
Maybe even 11:30 if they let us.
Yeah, that might be pushing it. I don't know. Today's beer of the day, actually, I had at the Malted Meeple. It was the Scrimshaw from North Coast Brewing Company in Fort Bragg, California. I found it to be really solid, really smooth, and a very clean Pilsner. Very drinkable on a summer day, kind of standard beer, but it had a very nice flavor profile to it. The way that I pretty much put it was it does just about everything right without being overly complex. And I wound up giving it a 4.25. And Jamie, you actually mentioned that you have had a lot of history with Scrimshaw in the past.
Yeah, it was, so I used to work at a hoppin' little craft beer bar in the town that I went to college in, Kent. Scrimshaw was the only beer that we had on tap all the time. Otherwise, all the taps were rotating, local and national and sometimes international beers. But Scrimshaw was the only one that we always kept on hand. And I remember it fondly because it had... The tap handle was like a mimic whale tooth, and it had like a carving on it in honor of the namesake of the beer. I always used to recommend it to anyone who, honestly, people who love beer, people who don't love beer, because it's exactly as you said. I think it's really easy for a beer company to do, the hoppiest beer or the booziest dunkel or something like that, but it's actually kind of challenging to do something very simple, very well, and that is exactly what Scrimshaw is.
I was very, very impressed, and I see quite a bit more of that in my future.
It's a very good one.
Did you have any beers that you wanted to talk about?
In the same vein as something you drank at the Meeple, I will also throw out there the one that I had was Hopnesia IPA from Mays Valley in Hartville, Ohio. It wasn't, anything like crazy or unique or new, but it really was a nice, solid pale ale. I liked it because it was kind of clean. It was not too overwhelming with how bitter it was. It had a little bit of a piney flavor to it, as usual. It was nothing groundbreaking as far as IPAs go, but it was a nice, easy drinker, I think.
I think I've had that in the past. We went there last year for an event, and I just enjoyed their beers overall, and the setting, too.
Oh, yeah. I haven't had a drink from there that I didn't enjoy, and you cannot beat their hospitality. Just the place is so fun. There's so much to do, and just a great little place.
Well, it is time to check my shelf of shame, and it has gone up by 2. It's the first increase I've had in quite a while. It is up by 2 to 161. But there were 5 new additions, all of them very small. I got my Button Shy Kickstarter in, and that package contains 5 games, so immediately that just sends the shelf of shame to the moon. Those 5 were Sprawlopolis, Arcane Bakery Clash, Liberation, Ragemore, and Seasons of Rice. I did get 3 games to the table. Ragemore is the first one that we'll talk about, and that is a puzzly solo game that's pretty much focused on strategic resource and hand management. It had a very Dark Souls kind of vibe to it from the artwork. I do need some more plays on it to form a solid opinion, but I liked it. It was different enough that I can't really think of anything else that really matches that from a solo perspective. It was pretty easy to pick up. Might go back and review the solo Button Shy games I've played in one chunk because I've got quite a few of them stacked up now. So the other 2 that I played that we'll actually be talking about on this show is Sprawlopolis and Papillon. And then 2 games I played on Tabletopia, which I was very impressed with. I remember Tabletopia actually being a lot worse than it is now from a control standpoint and from a content standpoint. I was very impressed with what they have on there now. Those 2 are Meadow with some very beautiful artwork and very fun evolving tableau building. And I'm in the middle of a game of Paladins of the West Kingdom. I am having some color blindness issues with that, with the cards, and it's really between the blues and purples. The red and green, surprisingly, were very, very easy to see. I'm liking the mechanisms on that, not necessarily liking the color blindness issues on the cards themselves. So on to what we've been playing, and Jamie, you actually wound up playing both these games with me, so I'm excited to talk to you about them.
I did, yeah.
First one was Sprawlopolis from 2018. It plays from 1 to 4 players in 15 to 20 minutes. Designed by Steve Aramini, Danny Devine, and Paul Kluka. And the artists were Loic Biao and Danny Devine, and it was published by Button Shy. In Sprawlopolis, players take the role of city planners building a city from the ground up. They'll flip over 3 scoring conditions from the top of the 18-card deck and then use the rest of the 15 cards to build out their city to best utilize those scoring conditions. Each turn, players will take one of the 3 cards in their hand, place it down into the city, potentially overlapping segments of cards already played, then pass the remaining 2 cards in their hands to their neighbor and draw a card from the deck. Play progresses until all the cards have been laid down. Players will then score the 3 scoring conditions from the beginning of the game, as well as their largest of each of the 4 contiguous blocks of each type of zone. And players will lose points for how many roads they have, and apparently the city hates maintaining the roads, so the more roads that you have, the worse that you're going to do. If they beat the procedurally generated score from the scoring conditions cards, then they win. I'll say that I am a big fan of Button Shy games, and I think Jamie has kind of experienced this now with my gushing over, their kind of business model. One of the big things I picked up was Tussie Mussie, and that just kind of spurred my love for them.
We loved it so much that we ended up, my partner and I ended up buying Tussie Mussie because of Sprawlopolis. We had so much fun with it.
Now, did you both pick up Sprawlopolis as well, or just Tussie Mussie?
Just Tussie Mussie for now, but I am a huge fan of portable games like that. I almost always won't be caught without a copy of Pears or Love Letter or Coup or something like that, on a family trip or even just a day outing or something. I'm the one who always brings the games. I'm always looking for ones that play well and are very portable. And, honestly, even though those are my go-tos for that sort of condition, I think this beats those out, even as great as those games are. I love the depth that was there. despite the simplicity, or at least the perceived simplicity of the game, it really is impressive what they were able to do with 18 cards. I mean, I'm like still kind of reeling with how much variety there was just in that one game, and then combined with the idea that each game has 3 different scoring conditions. I remember sitting there at the end of the game thinking, like, oh, did we do it? Did we make it or not? And it was just kind of like, I kind of got caught up in it, in a way that I wasn't expecting. It was really nice. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and you mentioned the 18 cards, and that's actually something that I had on the notes as well, that I just can't believe what is capable of being done with 18 cards when you use the front and back of everything. It's so astounding to get that much gameplay in. This really didn't disappoint me one bit. I've played it a couple of times as well solo, and I think it plays just as well solo as it does multiplayer. And it's really, it just kind of hits a sweet spot of being strategic without a huge rule set, which is something that I really look for in games. And I think we might have taken, 5 minutes to teach at the table, and then we were up and running.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes for, I would say, Arwen, you and I are pretty seasoned board game players, maybe even you more so than me. But my partner is a serial rules ignorer. When teaching the rules, she is lost after a couple minutes. Not because she can't understand it, but because she just kind of she enjoys games but doesn't like learning them. And, she was on board from the get-go. And I think the only thing that we all kept forgetting was that you could overlap the cards, which is once you wrapped your head around that, the whole thing came together in this really nice way, and it all started to it almost felt like you were looking at the game in a different way once you put that together,
Yeah, and I will absolutely echo that with my girlfriend, because she is very much the same way. In fact, I think we made the comment several times, or our partners did, that they're kind of living the same life. It was kind of funny. Very, very similar, for sure. The one issue that I did have with this game is that the colors could get a little bit sketchy for me. That is something that I maybe bring up a little bit too much on the podcast, but I do have some color blindness issues, and between the parks and the residential zones, the green and the brown just kind of didn't jive for me all that well. But fortunately, there was enough art that I was able to distinguish between them and not have too much trouble. So that is something to consider, but I do feel that they were able to pretty adequately overcome everything. So Jamie, did you have any other thoughts on Sprawlopolis?
I just wanted to note that the art style was just it was really cute, macro style. The colors were really pleasing. The color palette they chose was it was just nice. It wasn't just a standard, the orange was autumnal a little bit, and the blue was for the different zones that were on the cards. It just was, it was very nicely put together, and the art was very it wasn't too busy. It was a good look.
It was functional, but it definitely wasn't just that utilitarian. I thought it was nice too, for sure.
Yeah,
that's a very good
because I could see the temptation of wanting to do something very, like you said, utilitarian, being that it's essentially a city planning game. So it was nice to see a little bit of an artistic twist.
So for my final judgment, I may have to take this game permanently off my shelf and put it directly into my purse. I find that this is an absolute gem of a portable game. I can't wait to introduce more people to it. Again, the amount that they're able to do in 18 cards on this game is just astounding. It's something that I've looked at expansions for. I don't know if I want to expand it, because then it's not that 18 card size, but at the same time, it's more Sprawlopolis. So I'm kind of on the fence about that. We'll see what happens. But that was Sprawlopolis. Well, the other game that we played, and we got most of the way through, we didn't quite get to finish, was Papillon. And that was published in 2020. Plays 2 to 4 players in 30 to 45 minutes, designed by J.B. Howell. Artist is Chris Beyer and Whitney Rader, and published by Colossal Games. And Papillon is a tile drafting, laying, and area majority game. During a round, players will first bid on turn order, then draft tiles from a central board, placing them in an expanding tableau in front of them. If players close a section of flowers in their tableau, they then place one of their butterflies into a 3-dimensional flower, matching the color they closed in. They'll score based on the majority control on each flower and closed-in sections of their tableau. The player with the most points at the end of the game wins. So, Jamie, I'm going to start with you and ask you what your thoughts were on Papillon.
I love the theming of this game. The box, first and foremost, the box was beautiful. Like the big butterfly on the front and just like very simple style. I was instantly like drawn in by that. And then the actual board itself and just the mechanics of the game, it all worked so well together in this nice blend of the garden that you're building, you know, being a little bit geometrical because you're building rows of flowers to increase the size of your garden, while simultaneously choosing rows off of the main game board, as you mentioned. It's just this nice juxtaposition between the artistic nature of, like, you know, creating this garden and then the pure geometry and strategy of, you know, choosing the right tiles and how to either deny your opponent if you were thinking that far ahead, or just finding flowers to build your garden a little bit bigger. I suffered from pure hubris of trying to make a nice long hedgerow of gardens, of flowers rather, and not finishing them before the end of the game. So one point I will add is don't go too hard or you'll end up like me and not score like any points. The only other thing I can think of is the 3D flowers are such a cool idea, like a really, really unique feature of the game, if a little unwieldy. I thought that they were, and I don't mean to steal your thunder if that was something you were going to say, but I thought that they were such a cool idea, and I really do like the very light board control, you know, mechanic of that. But I thought that it didn't take anything away from the game, but it was just a little bit difficult to negotiate that, being around a table and trying to angle the butterfly just right to put the little clothespin on the flower. But that said, it's such a unique concept, I would not change it.
Yeah, and great minds think alike, because I think that's an excellent point. So there's a couple of different things with the 3D elements. The one is kind of seeing around it. So you have basically this 4-sided flower that you're kind of trying to figure out, okay, well, I need to have more butterflies on this than my opponent because it's an area majority mechanic. And it's almost impossible to see all the different sides at once. So if your opponent like pins one of their butterflies down to the bottom and it's facing them, it's almost kind of impossible to see everything all at once. So that can be an issue. And then, Jamie, like you said, there were some butterflies, especially yours, that wound up being very difficult to clip because I think your butterflies were actually a little bit bigger from a just cardboard standpoint, and then you had the clip on the bottom of them. So trying to really negotiate that and get that exactly where you needed to go was a little bit of a pain.
Yeah, the wings made it a little difficult.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy. Like I didn't think that it was going to be that bad to go and pin everything on. But like you said, I don't think that I would change it. I think I might hot glue the elements so that I didn't have to deal with the fragility of the flowers as much, because that was kind of an issue. You know, with them kind of falling apart and falling out of place, I think I might hot glue everything together. But it would be a huge detriment to this game to just have, okay, well, I'm going to put a butterfly meeple in this area on the board, and that's my area majority mechanism. I think that's a really, really good point. It was fairly easy to pick up and play, too. Not as easy as Sprawlopolis was, obviously, but I don't think we had many issues with this, if I'm not mistaken. And especially compared to the other game that I brought that sadly we didn't get to the table, that I really want to with you.
I was looking forward to that, but I am very glad that we got to try those too, because the thing with Papillon is, like, box art aside, the things that I mentioned, I don't know that I would have gone out of my way to pick that up if it were, like, on the shelf. I probably would have passed it up, for something that, like, fits a little bit more thematically to things that I tend to gravitate towards. But I'm so glad that we got a chance to try that, because I now have a gift that I know I can buy my partner in the future because she specifically asked for it.
Well, I'm glad that she enjoyed it too. That's very good to hear. I will make another comment on something that you talked about, and that was expanding your garden out into one long row. I saw Allie do that too. I tried to, and it was very difficult. I tried to keep as kind of close and tight as possible, which is pretty easy in the beginning because you're only trying to connect maybe one edge of a tile. But when you start getting multiple tiles placed and you start having to connect 2 or 3 edges, you have to make sure that you connect everything, or else it's not a valid placement. So it's not like I have these white flowers that are going up against these yellow flowers, and then I'm able to place that, I just don't get any points. No, you literally cannot place that unless it connects, which makes for some very difficult tile placement and choices that you have to make during the game. So I found that really interesting.
I did run into that problem. I think I would have been fine, save for the fact that, I needed just the right shape to finish my hedgerow, which I did get multiple times, but the color on the opposite side was not conducive to the rest of that placement. I'm so sorry about the noise. My cat has decided he must absolutely be the center of my attention right now.
Yes. So. Well, always. Yeah, I found that really, really interesting. It was a nice... I won't say nice, but it was a very interesting way of handling that. Like, normally tile placement, hey, you can put this here, but you're not going to get any points if you don't match. This is just like literally, you don't match, too bad. Find someplace else to put this.
Yep. Not even consolation points.
Just, no, you're not doing this. It was another game, and I've talked about a couple games in the past couple episodes that don't necessarily do anything new, but I really did like how it integrated the area majority and tile laying, and it did it in a fresh, unique way. And I think you made an interesting point in the fact that I wouldn't normally go and pick something like this up. I think Allie was with me at the time, and she says, "Oh, this has butterflies on it. Check it out." And then I read some BGG reviews, and people enjoyed it, so I said, okay. And then proceeded not to get it out for like a year. But that's my status quo.
I do have one more minor complaint about the game, and that is that I collected gnomes the entire game and received... no benefit from that, and I'm just a little sad because I really wanted to be the queen of the gnomes, and I was, but for to what end?
Well, first you were trying for Caterpillar Queen.
That's true,
and that would have gotten you some victory points.
That's
Gnome
true.
Queen just kind of said, okay, well, here's some caterpillars
and some stingy gnomes, I will add,
and some very stingy gnomes. I think the maximum that they gave out was like, what, two caterpillars?
Yeah, that was the most I
caterpillars?
got, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't very much. Okay, so for my final judgment, this was a fairly solid offering. I'm not sure how often I'm going to get it out to the table, but I do like what it does. It does have a bit of setup time. It does have a little bit of fiddling with the 3D components, but it does make for a very visually appealing game. So I don't really see a need to cull it from my collection anytime soon. There's nothing that really does everything that this does in the same package. So it's staying around for a little bit. We'll see how long that stays, and that is Papillon. Well, stay tuned, because up next we're going to talk to Jamie about her painting endeavors. Stay tuned. Well, we are back with Jamie Kraus. And Jamie, why don't you get a little bit more into what you do, what your background is, what exactly you do as kind of a career now?
Absolutely. I'd love to. So I mentioned earlier, I paint minis. As niche of a hobby as that is, there are a lot of options. So to be more specific, I mostly paint miniatures for tabletop war games, such as Warhammer or any of the number of historical war games that are out there. I've recently started painting Marvel Crisis Protocol minis, which is so much fun because there's like already existing art of these characters and I get to bring them to life. I don't have to make any color choices. They're done for me, which is fantastic. I know we had mentioned this at our little hangout recently, but I don't know if I confirmed it with you. I recently negotiated and completed the acquisition of my friendly local game store.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
I know that you had mentioned that was kind of in the process, but you had not confirmed it at that point. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it was kind of in a liminal space, and then the past 2 days, the owners just come in more and more flustered, and he's like, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. And I'm like, well, I do. So let's make this happen, and we did. So for better or worse, I own a significant portion of his inventory now, and then we're gonna slowly transition from his ownership to mine. So the next step is, the basics, filing an LLC and all that boring business stuff. But in the meantime, I'm going to still be painting minis, which I do kind of on a commission basis at this point. And I have casually become a bit of a streamer as well. I started by painting my own minis when I first started playing Warhammer about 4 or 5 years ago, and just got to a point where I was like, okay, I kind of have a bit of a knack for this. I'm going to start putting some effort into really learning, this physical medium, because I've always been somebody who considers myself to be an artistic person, but my art was usually, honestly, audio. I was a singer. I would play instruments. I've recorded podcasts, so literally almost everything I did had to do with voice or music or something of that nature. I never had any physical art experience. And then I picked up a brush one day and started working on minis, and turns out, I had a knack for it. And it feels like one of those rare things where you look at people who are better than you and you're not dismayed. You're encouraged. You're challenged. You feel like, I can get there one day. I'm not there yet, and that's okay. How do I get there? What do I do? How do I learn this particular technique? That has opened up a whole new world of creativity for me, and I started feeling like I want to share this with people. The best way I can do that is streaming. I also find a lot of joy in being somebody who streams, being somebody who voluntarily puts myself in the public eye, similar to you, how you do with your podcast, being somebody who is, of an LGBTQ identity, being successful and visible and an advocate is so important to me as a creator. So it kind of all started to converge, and I was like, okay, I'm making a little money painting minis. I have all these great, complicated, but very encouraging feelings about creativity. And then COVID hit, and I was like, okay, the one thing I do to disengage, to kind of step away from reality, is to paint, to not play Animal Crossing for 8 hours a day, which is what we were doing at the beginning of the pandemic. I mean, everybody was, but
just about everybody.
So I was like, I have this thing now where I can disengage. I don't have to be playing a game or something like that. It's literally something where it's just me and the thing that I'm working on and interacting with it in an analog way. And it just started getting me to think about my creativity and my relationship with it. And, that capitulated into, my identity and just sort of unleashing this whole new world of art that I had never touched before in tandem with my recognition of myself. And I don't know, it just became this like really beautiful like symphony in a way of things that I was discovering about myself and my creativity and the arc that took. And so, of course, I tried to monetize that because that's the natural thing to do, right?
Yeah, you find something that you love, let's make money off of it.
Well, right. And the writing was a bit on the wall with my previous job, and I was like very dissatisfied. And after years of like dead-end desk jobs and things that had nothing to do with my interests or talents or anything like that, I decided to take matters into my own hands about a month and a half ago and try to make it as a commission painter through a, much like I've been speaking this whole time, a meandering journey. I have befriended a local game store owner who was trying to get out of the industry and just play games instead of, selling them. And, I realized that this was for me. I had worked for a small business before, and it was something I really loved. And now I can paint and run the game store and create a community and be a visible, successful trans woman. And just sort of like everything fell into place all at once. And it was just, I've been forcing myself to recognize that it is a convergence of hard work and, putting myself out there and really trying to make connections and push my creativity, and just sort of like felt very satisfying, very gratifying, because it is the inevitable conclusion of a lot of things, but also the beginning of something that I'm finally like committing to, in a professional way. And I'm just very excited about it.
Well, I think you answered like 3 of my questions I had on here instead of one, but it was a fantastic explanation.
Thank
you. I loved how you talked about discovering your love of painting and kind of discovering your identity at the same time. And you brought up the representation, the big R word, which is a dirty word sometimes for some people, but it's something that I struggle with too. For a Twitch streamer and somebody who's very visible and out in the open, it's something that you almost have to be a visible representation of, the community. And for me, it's kind of been a struggle, do I talk about it? Do I not talk about it?
Absolutely.
So it's something that I do bring up every once in a while, because I do feel that it's important to know that there are some of us out in the community that are doing really cool things, and life doesn't end when you come out. It's this constant kind of process of finding yourself.
I feel that, part of what kept me from exploring my identity was a lack of understanding and seeing other trans women out, successful, visible, etc. In the off chance that somebody even thinks about their identity for a moment as a result of the work that I do, is what I feel would make me feel successful. Not even the case of like somebody trying to question their gender identity or anything like that, but just to question their relationship, with gender, with their sexuality, with their life in general. Like I just feel like introspection is something that is not encouraged. And, it ties so closely in with creativity and art, whether that's through an audio medium or a physical medium. There's this reflection that has to occur in order to direct with your creative side, and how to express that. Expression in general just becomes kind of the theme. And so I find that if I can help people challenge their preconceived notions or the things that they've always taken for granted, I maybe in a tangential way can help them find maybe their medium or their passion or the thing that they're, and not to put too much importance on what I do. It is what it is. But I don't know. I think there's something there, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because I love it. And I like to try to encourage people who watch my stream to find a hobby and do it with me on Wednesday nights when I do stream, and just sort of like take time to create, because it's such an important outlet.
Well, and I think you have found something that you absolutely love. When you find that kind of, I want to share this with people, I'm going to be inspired by people who quote unquote do this better than me. When you find that inspiration from them, instead of, oh, well, I could do that better, someday, or they're so much better than me, I'm never going to be, up to this level, to get that inspiration and say, I'm going to learn from this, so that I can better myself. I think that's where you hit that sweet spot of, I really love this activity so much that I really want to better myself.
It truly is a unique situation too, because I can honestly say I've never felt that way about any endeavor that I've undertaken before. And so once I recognized that feeling and observed it, I was like, okay, this is a purpose. This feels like a purpose, right? This is, even though it's not something that's like terribly important in the grand scheme of things, it's mine. And, it's like, that's what that feels like. I've always heard it before, and I'm lucky to be able to know that about myself now. It's important to recognize that you're completely right, that it is something that I've discovered, something really important to me. And, maybe it's such a niche thing that not everybody can understand it or observe it, but it's a very lucky thing to have stumbled across.
I think that we're very fortunate that we are able to have kind of found our niche place in the world and kind of where we belong and find what we really, truly love to do. What's your favorite part of Twitch streaming?
I think the best part for me is engaging with the people that are in my chat while I'm streaming. It's just like knowing that there are people there who are like voluntarily spending their time with me is just, first of all, it's really humbling, but also it's exciting because there are people who can benefit from the thing that I've spent so much time learning. I have a lot of people in my chat who, come to ask questions about painting or may just like banter with me while I'm doing something and learn a new technique or try something. And hopefully I can create that automatic response of seeing somebody who's doing something better than you, or not necessarily better than you, but like more can execute it more thoroughly than you can, and just sort of like learning from that, because that's how I figured it out. I watched a lot of videos, I did all sorts of research, and the one thing I always talk about, and I promise I'll get to the point here, but the one thing I always talk about is momentum, right? When you are hobbying, especially, because our lives are so busy and because everything is so demanding of us, generating momentum to do something that isn't necessarily immediately beneficial to anything else going on other than your mental health is so difficult. Sitting down and just hashing out and doing something, I'm sure you maybe feel the same way when you're trying to play solo board games or something like that, but finding the time, prioritizing those things is very difficult. And so I always try to focus on momentum. And it's something that is generated internally and externally. And so the reason I try to encourage people to hobby along with me is because I know that if somebody else is doing something hobby related, I am so much more likely to do it as well, to join in, to sit and chat while I paint or something like that. And so you're almost passing that momentum off to someone else, and then in hopes that it'll come back to you at some point, and that's my favorite part about streaming, is potentially providing that momentum to other people, or even just inspiring somebody to feel like, oh man, I could never do that. It's too, my hands are too shaky, or, I don't understand, how the paint moves, or whatever the case is, and just sort of like let people know that it's not something that's just going to come natural, but it is something that everyone can do. And so hopefully, like that is maybe not something I can actually tangibly see happening, but I hope that interacting with my audience, which is my favorite part, is something that encourages that.
Well, and I think it almost kind of feels like a community in a way, that you have people that constantly kind of come back and chat with you, and you're almost forming relationships with your viewers and being able to hear how they're progressing, or, kind of hear stories that they're telling through the chat. I know when I was Twitch streaming, that was definitely a common theme.
It's great to see the same people showing up week after week and getting to know a little bit about them, and just like seeing their name pop up in chat and just being like, this complete stranger has decided that they're going to spend their evening with me, to do this. And it's just like, so again, it's so humbling. It's very encouraging, and so it's like you slowly become not strangers, and that's part of the fun of it, because you may never know their real name. You may just know them by their screen name and the army that they are painting or something like that. But it is a relationship nonetheless, So it's important, especially the past year that we've had, to legitimize and validate even relationships that are remote like that,
And I know that from my experience viewing your stream, you have a ton of tips that you give out as you're going through and doing your mini paintings, whether it's people asking or whether it's something that you're working on, just kind of giving tips out and saying, this is how I do this. Like the one that stood out to me was you're almost kind of building a pyramid where you're laying your foundation and then working your way up. Do you have any tips for any listeners who are just kind of getting into painting or looking to build their painting skills?
Absolutely. The first thing I try to tell to everybody who's kind of like maybe buying their first mini or something like that is you really don't need anything fancy to get started. I still buy the value packs of brushes at the craft store and use those. I do have like my fancy sable brushes that I use every now and then, but like frankly speaking, you don't need a ton of stuff to get started, and I promise you, no matter how daunting it feels, you can do it. It may not look the best at first, but I would recommend always saving your first mini because it's so great to look back and see, like how you've progressed. There's a really special moment where you can look back at something that you were so proud of when you did it and think, oh, that's something I know now that I could do a little bit better. And that's, like maybe you never go back and touch it. Maybe you don't update that model, but you have almost a timeline of like your growth. So don't feel like you need to buy all the fancy stuff. Maybe paint, maybe invest in decent paint, but outside of that, just take it slow. I've found that painting is more about being persistent than necessarily talented. It truly is just a test of patience.
Practice and kind of repetition, that kind of thing.
And not even necessarily that. If you take it slow, doesn't matter how long it takes to paint. If you take it slow and you take a methodical approach, you can almost do no wrong.
Well, one thing that I was going to ask is any tips on getting rid of googly eyes on your minis, because I know that was, even though I had a lot of other parts I had to work on, that was one of the parts that really stood out, was getting a mini kind of like halfway done and saying, okay, yeah, this is okay, and then trying to finish off those eyes. Boy, do they get horrible.
That is a tale as old as time, and there are two answers to that question. The first answer I will say is, if you're so inclined, invest in a micron pen, because I have a .005 millimeter size micron pen whose tip is so small that like you have to hold it within like 3 inches of your face to see it.
Oh, wow.
And it is invaluable for dotting eyes because you almost can't screw it up at that point. As long as you're close to the center, you're going to get at least a little bit of a pupil there, and that's going to be enough. And you can move on. If you absolutely must paint eyes, find a way to to justify glowing eyes on your model, because it's way easier to just paint the whole pupil or the whole eye a color and then make it look as if it's casting light on the rest of the face.
Yeah, I know that was my biggest pain point when I was trying to paint a couple of minis, was just the eyes. But now that I know about this magic pen,
oh, you've got to get one. It's so great. I ended up using it as an excuse to get a whole line of them, because there's all sorts of different colors now too, and you can get all different sizes and stuff. But the one you want is the 005 micron pen. It is invaluable for mini painting. And as a side note, when it comes to painting eyes, I mentioned the Marvel Crisis Protocol minis earlier. I love painting them because half of them have domino masks, and those domino masks just have white eyes on them, so I don't have to paint anything.
It just makes it so much easier.
It does.
Well, I do have to ask you one last question, because this is a board gaming podcast. What are some of your favorite board games?
Well, aside from the obvious answer, which is like Warhammer, of course, it's not quite a board game, but it is a tabletop game. So if I can sneak that one in there, I will.
Sure, I'll allow it.
Thank you so much. Recently, my favorites have been Dice Throne. I got all 3 huge boxes of that game, and I have not had enough time to play it, but I'm so looking forward to the opportunity to do so.
It is amazing. I will say,
love rolling dice. That's why I like Warhammer, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. Who doesn't?
If we're talking like all-time favorites, I'm always down for a game of Catan. Like, I don't care how played out it gets. There's just something great about, like, it busting that tried and true game out and just having a good time trading sheep.
There is no shame in that.
No, not at all. It's a little bit on the more basic side. Like it's a little bit above entry level for board games, but I think that's kind of like Scrimshaw, like we were talking about. It's such a simple game, but it's done so well. It's got its shortcomings, sure, but for people that are new to the game that don't know how to exploit it and everything like that, it is such a pure experience. Overall, I'm just a big fan of conceptually. Like role-playing light games, or I've been referring to them as, I want to say serialized, but that's not the word. Basically games that you can continue to play and you can grow the characters. There's a bit of an RPG element. So
a campaign or a legacy.
Yeah, something like Gloomhaven or even Dice Throne has a way to play that. There's a wonderful game that I cannot wait to play more of called Cursed City that came out from Games Workshop. And it's just got this like grimdark kind of fantasy feel where a vampire has taken over this poor town, and you and your ragtag group of adventurers have to fight your way through his minions and figure out. You have to, during the span of the game, figure out the method by which he can be killed in this particular session, because it changes, and then execute it in that way. And your characters can level up. You can buy gear and everything in between sessions. You return to like a flying ship, and you go back into the city at the beginning of every day. You have to get out of the city by night, otherwise the creatures get stronger. It's just got this like interesting variety, and I've heard the rule set is a little bit flawed, but I am really, really excited to dive into that a little bit more. I just need to find time to and a dedicated group to play that, that repeated. I think I've been calling it an anthology game. No, that's not the word either. Dang it. Okay, forget it.
I would definitely consider that kind of a campaign style game for sure. That's very interesting, though. I like the concept of that.
The biggest problem with it was that they promised mass production of it and ongoing production more so, and failed to do that. And that's probably its biggest shortcoming, is that it's very difficult to get. But I do have a copy, and I just need people to play with. So I'm very excited to get that on the table at some point.
People and time are always a difficult resource to get, especially nowadays.
Absolutely.
Well, and I do want to go back to the Catan reference, because it is something I have encounters with people when they meet me and they go, "Oh my God, you have all these board games and everything." And I said, "Yeah, well, what's your favorite that you've played?" And they go, "Well, you probably wouldn't think it's anything special, but Catan." And I'm like, Catan's perfectly fine. I think whatever people kind of find joy in, and
absolutely,
even Monopoly.
Yeah, why the heck not? I'm not here to yuck anyone's yum,
And I think we need to be kind of cognizant of that as a community, because when it comes to bringing people in, which is ultimately something that I'm here to do if I'm talking about games and, I want people to play games. Some games may not be for me, but they may be for somebody else. And I actually really do enjoy Catan too. I have a soft spot in my heart for it. So it's my dirty secret. Don't tell anybody.
Okay.
Oh, whoops. Well, thank you so much, Jamie. It's been such an awesome experience having you on the show, and I'd love to have you back as well.
I would love to be back. This is so much fun.
I definitely have to give you the opportunity to give out all of your social media to the audience.
Absolutely. On almost every social media platform, I am at jamiedaggers, all one word, except for on Twitter. I think there's an underscore in between them. It's not important. If you look up Jamie Daggers, you'll probably find me. I have a link tree on most of them, so if you find one, you'll find them all. On Twitch, I am also at twitch.tv/jamiedaggers. That is once a week on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. We also have a Discord where people can share their models and ask questions. So if you are somebody who's aspirationally looking at minis, gray minis, and wondering where to start, you can always join the Discord. We'll always be happy to help you out, or drop in chat and just ask some questions. And, always good to see people.
Or if you're lazy like me, you can just send them to Jamie, and then she'll go and paint them for a fee.
I actually just base coated Ukatoa, and I'm so excited to paint that on stream. So I'm going to
so excited to see that.
I will let you know when that happens. So if anybody in your audience wants to tune in for that one, that'll be really great, because there's definitely going to be a crossover of people who are interested in crit roll and mini painting at that point.
Oh, for sure.
The last thing I want to add is the best way, if you are somebody who wants minis painted, I have a Facebook page, a group. It's facebook.com/JamieIsPainting. That is the best way to get a hold of me if you're interested in looking for a commission. So we can discuss it. I will quote stuff for you before we make any choices, and whether you want me to take full creative control or you have a perfect idea in mind, I can make it come to life.
Awesome, Jamie. And now I have to get into my social media. We have our Facebook page. Our Instagram and Twitter is at cardboard_time. I'm so jealous that you were able to get most of yours without the underscore because I was not able to.
It's such a pain.
Oh my goodness. It certainly is. I do have a Twitch at twitch.tv/cardboardtime. That is all one word. I probably should have put an underscore because that would have actually been consistent.
Brand consistency.
Yeah, exactly. We have our Board Game Geek podcast page, so make sure to go and check that out. And any questions, suggestions, or ideas for discussion topics, we're always more than glad to have those at cardboardtime@gmail.com. And as always, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you again in another 2 weeks for another episode of Cardboard Time.